I'm thrilled that Kim Scott, author of the groundbreaking bestseller Radical Candor, is joining us for today's Career Huddle. If you haven't read the book, do yourself a favor and get a copy or listen to it as I did. I've pulled out dozens of quotes and would literally need 4 hours to cover all of the questions I have for Kim. So I'm hoping we'll get through most of them. But let me set the stage with this quote. The ultimate goal of radical candor is to achieve results collaboratively that you could never achieve individually. And I love that as a vision for the conversation, since the CMO community, I mean, you are about getting others to sort of work together to make something magic happen. So we're going to focus the discussion on how CMOs can apply the tenets of radical candor to their most pressing challenges. And with that, hello, Kim, how are you and where are you?
I am doing well. I'm thrilled to be here with you all. I am in Los Altos, California, in the heart of Silicon Valley, and I think we just had a little earthquake here. I don't know if you saw the it was a very little one, but things were
Amazing.
wobbling. Yes.
Well, I was literally in your neighborhood yesterday in Mountain View.
Oh wow. Well, we should
Yeah,
we should have tried to get together.
I
Sorry I
know.
missed you.
I was there all of like 7 hours. But
Okay.
can you explain the core concept of radical candor for those in the audience who may be unfamiliar with it?
Sure. The core idea of radical candor is that you're going to challenge directly at the same time that you care personally. And I probably should have put care personally first. So when you can care and challenge at the same time, that's radical candor. When you challenge, but you forget to show you care, that's obnoxious aggression. Sometimes people confuse those two things. Maybe I should have called it compassionate candor. And obnoxious aggression is a big problem. It's a problem because it hurts other people. It's also a problem because it's inefficient. If I'm a jerk to you, you go into fight or flight mode, and then you literally can't hear what I'm saying. So I'm wasting my breath. But it's also a problem for a more subtle reason. I don't know about you all, but for me, when I realize I've acted like a jerk, it is not my instinct to go the right way on care personally. Instead, it's my instinct to go the wrong way on challenge directly. And then I wind up in the worst place of all, manipulative insincerity. And these two things, obnoxious aggression and manipulative insincerity, that's where drama happens when things go wrong at work. But they are not the most common mistakes. The most common mistake that most people make the vast majority of the time is what happens when we remember to show that we care personally, but we're so worried about not hurting someone's feelings or not offending them that we fail to tell them something they'd be better off knowing in the long run. And that is what I call ruinous empathy. So that's the radical candor in short.
Oh, I love it. And oh my God, there's just so many threads going through my mind. First of all, the manipulate and
Manipulative insincerity.
yes, and the I mean, I definitely have the TV show Silicon Valley, and
Yes.
you got featured in that, right? They sort of applied it the worst
Yes.
possible way, right?
Yes. Yeah. They confuse radical candor for manipulative insincerity and obnoxious aggression.
Right, and that's not what we're talking about. But so, and then the ruinous part of this, and it's funny, when you and I talked, I immediately thought of a candid conversation that I had with an employee many years ago when I was at JWT, and I told you the story, and it was about a guy who was a slow walker. And
Mm-hmm.
he was the only slow walker at J. Walter Thompson at the
Yeah.
time. And it was a weird observation, but it turned out that he was just, this was the wrong business for him. And he went on to
Yeah.
being a best-selling author in the food business. And this helped him sort of launch his career. And it was a moment where, I mean, I don't know if that metaphor was accurate, but, and he remembers it too. And sort of like, that's weird, but it was an indication of a mismatch. So anyway, let's talk about the, that a little bit.
Yeah, so I mean, you maybe it would help if I shared a story with you about a moment when I was maybe partly ruinously empathetic, partly manipulatively insincere. What do you think?
Perfect.
Okay. So I had just hired this guy, and we'll call him Bob. And I liked Bob a lot. He was smart, he was charming, he was funny. He would do stuff like we were at a manager offsite, and it was a startup, and somehow we wound up getting talked into playing one of those endless get to know you games. And everybody's really stressed out. And Bob's the guy who has the courage to raise his hand and to say, I can tell everyone is stressed out. and that everybody kind of wants to get back to work. I've got an idea. It'll help us get to know each other, and it'll be really fast so we can do what we really want to do, which is just get back to work. And he says, let's just go around the table and confess what candy our parents used when potty training us. Really weird, but really fast. Weirder yet, we all remembered Hershey Kisses right here. And then for the next 10 months, every time there was a tense moment in a meeting, Bob would whip out just the right piece of candy for the right person at the right moment. So Bob was a little quirky, but he brought some levity to the office. Everybody loved working with Bob. One problem with Bob: he was doing terrible work, absolutely terrible work. I was so puzzled. I couldn't understand what was going on because he had this incredible resume, this great history of accomplishments. I learned much later that the problem was he was smoking pot in the bathroom 3 times a day. Maybe 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 that explained all that candy that he had at all times. But I didn't know any of that at the time. All I knew is that he was handing stuff into me and there was shame in his eyes. He knew he wasn't doing good enough work. And I would say something to him along the lines of, "Oh, Bob, this is a great start. You're so awesome. You're so smart. We all love working with you. Maybe you can make it just a little bit better," which of course he never did. So let's pause for a moment. Why did I say that to Bob? I think part of it was truly ruinous empathy. I really did like him and I really didn't want to hurt his feelings. But if I'm honest with myself, there was also something a little bit more insidious going on. There was some manipulative insincerity because Bob was popular and Bob was also very sensitive. And there was part of me that was afraid if I told Bob in no uncertain terms that his work wasn't nearly good enough, he would get upset. He might even start to cry. And then everyone would think I was a big you know what. And so the part of me that was worried about my reputation as a leader, that was the manipulative insincerity part. The part of me that was worried about Bob's feelings, that was the ruinous empathy part. And this went on for 10 months.
Oh my.
And eventually the inevitable happened. And I realized that if I didn't fire Bob, I was going to lose all my best performers because not only had I been unfair to Bob not to tell him what was going on, I had been unfair to the whole team. And everyone was frustrated. Their deliverables were late because Bob's deliverables were late. They couldn't spend as much time on their work as they needed to because they were having to redo Bob's work. And the people who were best at their jobs were frustrated by this. They wanted to do the best work of their lives and they couldn't in this situation and they were going to quit. So I sat down to have a conversation with Bob that I should have started 10 months previously. And when I finished explaining to him where things stood, he kind of pushed his chair back from the table. He looked me right in the eye and he said, "Why didn't you tell me?" And as that question was going around in my head with no good answer, he looked at me again and he said, "Why didn't anyone tell me? I thought you all cared about me." And now I realized that thinking I was being so nice by not saying anything to Bob, I'm now having to fire him as a result of it. Not so nice after all. It was a terrible moment. It was bad for me. It was much worse for Bob. It was bad for the whole team and it was bad for our investors. We weren't getting results. And yet it was too late to save Bob. All I could do in the moment is make myself a very solemn promise that I would never make that mistake again and that I would do everything in my power to help other people avoid making that mistake because I'm not the only one. Every manager I've ever talked to has made some version of that mistake. And that is really why I wrote Radical Candor and why I'm talking to you all today.
I know that they know that some of those number twos are underperforming. And that's such a huge issue because if they aren't doing it, the CMO can't rise. They can't be the leader that they want to do because they're down in the weeds solving the problems. So, assuming you recognize that there's an issue and you recognize that there's an issue early, what's the solution here? How's that conversation go?
So there's an order of operations to Radical Candor, and it should always start with actually soliciting feedback, not dishing it out. Like if we go back to Bob, maybe I was doing something that was frustrating poor Bob so much he was forced to toke up in the bathroom 3 times a day. I don't know because I never asked him. So it should always start with soliciting feedback. Don't dish it out till you prove you can take it. And then the other thing that you want to do is you want to give praise. You want to make sure that you're not suffering from what I call sort of, often we talk about technical debt, but often we also have feedback debt. And sometimes when there's something that you haven't said for a while, you have a number two and you haven't said the thing and you haven't said the thing, pretty soon that's all you notice when you walk by this person or when you're on a call with this person. And you've forgotten all the things you appreciate about the person. So the next step after soliciting criticism is to give praise, to back up a little bit and remember what you appreciate about this person, and to give voice to it. And this is not some kind of like Six Sigma process that I'm talking about. You can do all these things this afternoon. So solicit criticism, give praise, and now you've sort of laid the groundwork for giving criticism. And before I talk about giving criticism, I want to say something about the feedback sandwich, which is not helpful. The feedback sandwich is kind of, there's a less polite term for that. I'll let you all guess what
Well,
it is.
I heard it as the compliment sandwich, and we
Yes,
did it as coaches of 6-year-olds on the
yes.
soccer field.
Okay, so you could use that too, but that's
Right.
not the less polite term. Um, uh, so anyway, the problem with it is that when you're trying to give feedback using this sandwich technique, you're using praise as sort of a criticism delivery platform. And that is not the right way to use praise. Praise is important on its own. Praise should be specific and sincere, and you should spend as much time making sure that you're getting the details right on the kind of praise you give as you do for criticism. Simple hint about praise: if it's something you would say to your dog, it's not helpful praise. So
Good boy,
yeah, yeah,
attaboy.
yeah, good job. You're so great. I mean, I love you. So that's good. It's good to say those things, but that is not specific, sincere praise. You're the best. None of those things are great praise. So what you want to do is, now that you have given praise that is specific and sincere and you've solicited some criticism, you want to think about how to have this impromptu 2-minute conversation with the person. And this is going to be fast, it's free, but it takes enormous emotional discipline. Somebody told me recently that offering someone criticism is like a moment of existential dread for them. And so, how do you go into this 2-minute impromptu conversation? You want to make sure that you're being humble. I call it candor and not truth because to me, candor implies that you're saying, here's how I understand the situation, but I also want to know how you understand the situation. It's a conversation. It's not a monologue. If you go in saying, I'm going to tell you the truth, you're kind of implying like, I've got a pipeline to God and you don't know anything. And that's not a great way to start a conversation. So you want to be humble. You want to state your intention to be helpful. You want to do this right away. The purpose of praise is, and by the way, all these tips apply to both praise and criticism. The purpose of praise is to tell people what to do more of. The purpose of criticism is to tell them what to do less of. And so you want to make sure that you're doing it right away. Why wait until they make the mistake again and again? Or why wait? If you want them to do more of it, you want them to do more of it now, not in 2 months. So you want to have these conversations immediately. In the before times, I used to say have these conversations in person. Now I say have them synchronously. The phone is actually your best medium for these for these conversations. And if you are in person, take a walk. Uh, and if you're going to have a synchronous but virtual conversation, use the phone. The reason is that when we're staring at each other, there may be more noise than signal in facial expressions and body language. We all imagine that we interpret these things perfectly, but we rarely do. So have the conversation either in person or on the phone, And then you want to praise in public, criticize in private. And you don't want to give someone either praise or criticism about their personality. You don't want to say you're a genius. You also don't say you want to say, you're stupid. You want to use context, observation, result, next step. In the meeting, when you said every third word, it made you sound stupid. Go visit the speech coach. Or in the meeting, that's the context, when you argued both sides of the discussion, that's the observation. You earned credibility, that's the result. Do more of that, that's the next step. So that's kind of the mindset to go into the conversation, but that's the conversation's only the first step, because next you have to gauge how it's landing.
All right. Well, let me interrupt you on a couple of things. One, because when this becomes a podcast, they're going to be trying to digest all this, and I need to help them do this.
Okay,
So
let's do that.
one of the things that I want to just throw in there which goes way back early, soliciting feedback. In the book, you have this line, what could I do or stop doing that it would make it easier to work with me? And I love that line. And it's just a great way of starting a conversation to say, hit me, right?
Yeah.
I'm in. And it is not a moment where you are cry. And it's funny you mentioned the dog thing, because I think that quote came up when some dog trainer saw you not disciplining your dog.
Yes.
And that person said to you, it's not mean, it's clear. So anyway, two great quotes about that sort of are in this caring personally and challenging directly. Has there ever been a time when you said, what could I do or stop doing that would make it easier to work with me? And then they said, yeah, be somebody else. I mean,
yeah. Yes. More often than I like to think. So what do you do in that moment when you disagree? You solicited feedback. And by the way, I like my question, but if you don't like my question, that's fine. In fact, I recommend don't write down my question, because if you all sound like Kim Scott and not like yourselves, then people won't believe you want to know the answer. In fact, when I was working with Krista Quarles at Open Table, she said to me, I could never imagine your words coming out of my mouth, Kim. She said, the question I like to ask is, tell me why I'm wrong. Okay, that's fine too. So write down your own question. But what do you do if you ask the question and you disagree with the feedback that you just solicited? This is kind of an awkward moment. I think one of the things that can really help in that moment is to remember, don't just say thank you for the feedback if you disagree, because the other person is going to hear something much less polite than that. They're going to feel like you're just brushing them off, and they're never going to give you feedback again. So you want to take a moment and look for the 5 or 10% of whatever they said that you can agree to. You probably don't disagree with 100% of everything they just said. So listen with the intent to understand and the intent to find some area of agreement, and give voice to that, just to demonstrate that you are listening, to make your listening tangible. And next, what you want to do is you want to say, let me think about the rest of it and then get back to you. And then you've got to get back to them. And because very often when you're sort of have a disagreement, you feel like if you explain why you disagree, it's going to present a challenge to your relationship. But so many of the best relationships I ever formed in my career started with a good, respectful disagreement. So explaining why you disagree can be actually a great reward for that candor. At some point, you can't argue endlessly. You got to listen, challenge, commit. And if you have a disagreement and you're not sure that you're right and you're not sure that the other person is right, the more often, especially if you're in a position of some authority, the more often you can defer to the other person, the better. So for example, Russ Laraway, who I started a company with and worked with at Google, he used to tell his team, if we have data, let's do what the data says. But if all we have are opinions, let's do what you think, not what but he would still share what he thought. And that is a great way to reward the candor, even when you disagree.
So, okay. So, and then I interrupted you as you were about to go to sort of the next step. You've solicited the feedback. You've been, done these things. What's you wanted to sort of
Yeah.
talk about some
So
other
there's
steps?
there's sort of four steps to soliciting feedback. So we skipped to the last one, reward the candor. The first thing is to write down your go-to question. So if all of you all listening can take out a pen and write down what's the question you're going to ask, who are you going to ask it of, and when are you going to ask it? And when should be today or tomorrow or today or Monday. Then our time today will be very well spent. The next thing you have to do once you've asked your question is you've got to listen with the intent to understand, not to respond. Because no matter how good your question is, you probably are not going to make the other person feel comfortable. The only way out of this discomfort is through. And so the simplest tip I have for you is close your mouth and count to 6. I only
Okay.
made it to 3. Only made it to 3. Almost nobody can endure 6 full seconds of silence, especially on a podcast. But even in a one-on-one conversation, 6 seconds can feel like an eternity. So the other person will probably say something. This brings us to the third step. The third step is to make sure that you're listening with the intent to understand, not to respond. Simplest technique I have here is to ask some follow-up questions. My daughter said to me the other day, "Mom, I wish you weren't the radical candor lady." And immediately this wave of parental guilt washed over me. And I thought, I'm spending too much time at work. And then I thought, well, I should make sure I'm listening with the intent to understand. So I asked a follow up question. I said, well, who do you wish I were? And she said, I wish you were the lady who minded her own business so I could go spend a little more time at work as far as she was concerned. So you want to make sure that you're really asking those follow-up questions, that you really understand what they're saying. And then the fourth step is to reward the candor, whether you agree with it or disagree with it. So we already talked about what to do if you disagree. If you agree with the feedback, what you want to do is you want to make sure that you fix the problem. Again, it's not enough to say thank you for the feedback. You want to make your listening tangible by fixing the problem that has been brought to your attention.
So all of this so far in framing it is about working with your team, the folks that you're with that report to you. And we talked about just the importance of the problem of ruinous empathy and the importance of being candid and constructive. I want to talk about shift gears a little bit because right now I'm anticipating a major crisis for CMOs in that something like, and this was a Gartner study, 3 out of 4 B2B CMOs are reporting that their budgets are flat, but they're for 2024, but their PE firms, their CEO, their CFO are expecting 25% growth or more. So there's this massive disconnect, and there's an absence of radical candor, if you will,
Yes.
because this is magical thinking.
Yes.
And the CMO is going to have some really hard conversations. Is there a way to shift radical candor when you're having a conversation with your boss?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, in theory, radical candor works the same way up, down, and sideways. And by the way, you can also use it at home with your spouse or your kids. So it is always a good idea to begin with soliciting feedback. And if you're soliciting feedback from your boss, there's a couple of nuances. You want to make sure that you understand your boss's perspective on what you're doing. And you also want to make sure that you understand the pressure that your boss is under and what's worrying them. Your boss probably feels just as stressed as you do right now in this environment. So you want to make sure that you understand where your boss is coming from and that you're rewarding the candor from your boss. And then when it comes to giving praise, I think we're often reluctant to give praise to our boss because it feels like kissing up, but the fact of the matter is when you take an extra beat to express gratitude, to tell your boss what you appreciate, you do a couple of things. One, you make yourself happier, you make them happier. And that's you improve your relationship, but also you tell them what to do more of. Often a boss doesn't know. They're doing something that's very helpful to you, but they don't know it's helpful to you. And so you want them to do more of that. I think also, for example, I was working with a team recently, and they're going through some real serious turmoil. And I sent a note to the leader of that team and said what I appreciated about the team. And I said, I know you're going through a lot of turmoil. You don't even need to reply to this email. I just wanted you to know this. And I know there's not that much I can do right now, but I want you to know that I think there's some quote from, I think it was Pope, who said, they also serve who only stand and wait. Like, so, just know I'm here for you. And so that can be a helpful thing to do.
Well,
And
it's funny. Go
but
ahead.
now it's time to give some criticism. So you've solicited feedback, you've given some praise, and now it's time to give some criticism. I think that one of the things that you can do to make it safe is you want to start in sort of a neutral place, and then you want to gauge how it lands. And by the way, this gauging of your feedback is also helpful with everyone, but especially with your boss. So if your boss seems sad or mad when you give them the feedback, that's your cue to move up on the care personally dimension. But especially if someone's mad, it's pretty hard. I mean, it's tempting to start yelling back. So get curious, not furious, if that's happening. And if your boss brushes your feedback off, which is also happens, that ever happen to anybody when you give your boss some feedback? Now you've got to go out further than feels comfortable on the challenge directly dimension. And that can be scary. But I was talking to a woman who had just gotten a new job on Wall Street, working for someone who had a reputation as the biggest jerk on Wall Street. And so, which is saying something, to be honest. And so she was a little nervous about this, and she adopted this mantra: there is only love. And what she meant was she was not going to talk badly about this guy to anyone, even her own husband. She was going to make sure that she was focusing on the stuff she appreciated about him. But when he did something that she disagreed with, or that frustrated her, she was going to go tell him directly. And it turned out he actually appreciated that. So speaking truth to power is an important part of radical candor, but I want to acknowledge that it feels tricky.
Yeah, I mean, I'm imagining the praise going something like this. I really love the way you stood up for marketing against the CFO and their unrealistic expectations.
Did they in fact make sure that the CEO actually did that?
Yeah,
That's
no, that's
not
why I'm
sort of
saying
a backstab.
no, that was yeah, unfortunate
I'm guessing
sarcasm
they, yes.
because it
Yeah.
didn't happen.
Yeah, that's
Uh
that's that's a great example. Thank you for that, of manipulatively insincere praise.
yes, I famous for that. So I'm still not convinced that we're there yet, because if we ask the CEO and we say, how's it going? How am I doing? And they say, well, you realize how much pressure I'm on? They're asking me
Yeah.
to grow the company 25%. What are you going to do to help me grow the company 25% next year? And you're looking at it saying, wait, not only is my budget down from where we would, not only did we not hit our growth targets this year, but now suddenly I'm supposed to take the same amount, which is going to go less far because of
Yeah.
inflation. And you want me to get these.
I think you
That's,
want, yeah, it's tricky. I think you want to say no in a way that strengthens your relationships. So an executive, a marketing executive at Apple, who I knew, who, when the iPad was about to launch, was told that she needed to support that launch, but there was going to be no increase in headcount, no increase in budget. And so this seemed like mission impossible, understandably, to her. And so what she did was she sat down with her boss and like understood what were the company priorities. And she realized there were a bunch of things that she usually did for the iPod team that she just was not going to do this year in order to support the iPad launch. And so she went to that team immediately and said to them, first, she went to her boss and said, I'm not going to do these iPod things. And she didn't wait to bad news early is the key. She didn't wait to tell the iPod team that she wasn't going to support their, their Christmas uh, 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 sales. And so they were going to have to figure out what they were going to do about that. And, those were hard conversations, conversations that it's tempting to kick the can down the road. But the fact that she was able to have them early and to prioritize appropriately and to figure out like what if she was going to do these important things, something was going to have to give, and she needed to be very explicit about what those things were that needed to give. So that's an example of I thought, handling a hard situation reasonably well.
Yeah, agree. And so I want to, I'm shifting gears slightly, but I remember a quote in the book that said, uh, I was laser focused on getting stuff done and fast. That slowed me down in the end. And
Yes.
I'm thinking of a lot of CMOs who are in fact laser focused and are expected to get a lot done in a short period of time. What went wrong for you, and what's the lesson here for the folks in the audience?
Yeah, so this happened shortly after I joined Google. I had 5 direct reports, and 3 of them quit in one. They didn't quit Google, but they joined other teams at Google in 1 week. And I thought, oh my gosh, I'm going to get fired. I remember like driving out to the coast and watching the ocean and thinking, God, are they going to pay for me to go back to New York when they fire me? It was like one of those bad moments. And I went to talk to my boss, who said, look, you jumped too fast to execution. And we sort of developed what I call a get stuff done wheel. And it always starts with listening. You want to listen to your team. You want to understand what's going on for them, what they're going to do, what they're not going to do, and make it safe for them to talk to you about what their priorities are. Just like in an ideal world, your CEO is making it safe for you. They're probably not, but that's okay. You can make it safe for your team. Then you want to help them clarify their thinking before you send their thinking into the rough and tumble of debate. So I'm thinking of doing this. I'm thinking of not doing that. I think and use your one-on-one time for that. Sort of to new ideas are so easily crushed, and you need to make sure you're creating a space for new ideas to flourish, for your to make sure that you're incorporating thinking from your team. Then you're getting close to making you're thinking about a decision. Before you make a decision about this new idea that your team had, you need to have a debate, and you need to include cross-functional peers in that debate. Anybody who's going to be impacted by the decision needs to be brought into the debate, so that once the decision is made, they don't feel like they were robbed of their opportunity to have a voice. And then you need to make a decision, but it's usually not you who needs to make the you need to push the decision into the facts. So your job in decision making is really to decide what needs to be decided, who needs to decide it, and by when do they need to decide, and then liberate them to make the decision. And you also want to make it clear when you're having a debate that at the end of this is not going to be a decision. You're getting your facts on the table, and there'll be a different meeting where you make a decision. Or maybe it's the same meeting, but the first half is for debate and the second half. But you want to make that very clear, because very often there's a lot of churn around. Half the people are there to make a decision, half the people are there to have a debate. And pretty soon, instead of talking about the thing, they're yelling at each other. You're jumping to conclusions and you're not, so you want to make that clear. And now now you've gone through this long process of listening, clarifying, debating, deciding. It's tempting to start executing. But first, you've got to persuade the people who weren't along for that whole ride that this is the right thing to do. And persuasion is very different from listening, clarifying, debating, deciding. You're not gonna, when you persuade people, you need to stay focused not just on sort of the rationale but also on their emotions. So you need to make sure that you're clear in your mind about not only what are the relevant and determinative factors that went into that decision, but what's the persuasive factor that went into the decision. And now it's time to start executing. Right. And then, but don't stay too long on implementing whatever the idea is. Now you got to learn whether it worked or not and start this wheel all over again. This is sort of how we get things done collectively, and it can feel like it's a waste of time, but it's not. You will get more done faster if you make sure you're moving through this get stuff done wheel, not getting stuck at any one step, but making sure that everyone is participating, that who needs to participate, because there is a tax when we collaborate. There's a collaboration tax, and you want to minimize that tax, but you also want to make sure that everyone is paying their fair share of that tax.
And so, oh my gosh, okay, a lot to unpack there. A couple of quick little punctuation points I want to put on knowing the difference in a meeting between debating and deciding. And I was thinking about that just in our organization. We have a tendency to have our status meetings, and then something will come up, we'll recognize a problem, we'll talk about it, and then we decide. And that feels really good. But in fact, we really needed to sleep on
Other
it a little
people,
bit.
yeah, and you probably
And
needed other people in the room. This
right.
is a problem with my with my staff meeting, as the as either whether I was at a startup that was growing or when I was at Google, the same thing would always happen in my staff meeting as things grew, is that pretty soon it was it took more and more and more time because we were trying to make decisions in the staff meeting. And then everyone who was in the meeting felt like it was a waste of time, and everyone who wasn't in the meeting felt sad and bad and left out. And it was like really frustrating. So I made a very clear rule. We will never make a decision in a staff meeting. We're going to have a separate big decisions meeting, and we're going to publish to everyone on the team what the agenda is, and anyone can come. That's an open meeting. And at first, the big decision meetings tended to be too big, but people really don't love to be in meetings. And so pretty soon it was sort of self-selecting. Only the people who needed to be there were there.
I love the expression minimize the collaboration tax. And I just want to clarify this. In particular, this is a case where there's a lot of managing sideways in the CMO job. I mean,
Yes.
like you have to have a partnership with your CRO, and a lot of things don't work if that partnership isn't. And let's say you decide to do something big, like an ABM program that
Yeah.
absolutely, that's why a lot of the folks are renaming it from account-based marketing to account-based marketing and sales, or some other way to say, we own this together. But
Yeah.
I just want to go back to this minimizing the collaboration tax. We've got folks involved, and marketing may do the preliminary, but then we need to get sales involved. Just talk about this is where
When to involve sales.
when to involve sales. And again, the notion of applying radical candor to your peers as opposed
Yes.
to your boss or your direct reports.
Yeah. So I think in terms of decision making, I would recommend involving your cross functional peers at the debate stage. Involve them earlier. It's tempting to not to include them in the debate and the decision parts, but it's going to be much harder to persuade them if you haven't involved them earlier. So I think that is a key thing, is you don't get to make decision. You need to make sure that when you're having the debate, you're inviting all of the people who are going to be impacted by the decision. You can't require them to come, but at least send them the meeting notes, right? If they can't come. So I think that's really important. I think in terms of cross-functional collaboration, cross-functional radical candor, again, these same basic 4 steps apply. You want to start by soliciting it. You want to make sure you're taking time to build your relationship and stay focused on the things you appreciate about the people who you're working with cross functionally. And you want to not allow too much feedback debt to enter into that relationship. I think often we feel like there's no point in having these radically candid conversations if we can't punish the person with bad ratings or threaten that we're not going to promote them. But I don't think that's true. I mean, radical candor is really about development. It's not about performance management. And it hooks into the intrinsic desire to succeed, to do good work, to grow, and to build good relationships at work. And so I think that it works just as well when you're not in a reporting chain as it does. In fact, it's really the only tool you have since you don't control usually their ratings or promotions.
Yeah, and again, there's a codependency
Yes.
that is it, particularly with sales, but even thinking about the CFO relationship and so forth. So there's a nuance in the book that I thought was so interesting: the difference between a rock star and a superstar.
Yes.
And can you talk about why CMO should want one more than the other?
So I liked when I think about sort of my team, and who to promote and that sort of thing. I would try to really distinguish between people who are in rock star mode and superstar mode. And the mode part of that is really important. It's tempting to use the term rock star as a label for people, but we're all in different modes at different moments in our career. So people, when they're in rock star mode, they are doing great work. Their performance is exceptional, but they're not necessarily gunning for the next job. They will, in fact, they don't want your job. They don't want your boss's job. They don't want to be Steve Jobs. They just want to do their job. And if you don't screw it up for them, they will often do that job very well for many years. And so you want to make sure that you're honoring people when they're in rock star mode and not promoting them, but also you don't want to save up all your high ratings and bonuses for people who are in superstar mode, because that then is unfair to the people in rockstar mode. So superstar mode, those are the people who are wanting to grow super quickly in their career. Sometimes I call it shooting star mode because they may not be on your team very long. They may go off and do something else, but they are not only great at the current job, they're actually operating at the next level already. And when people are in superstar mode, you need to keep giving them new challenges. You probably are going to need to make sure they understand their path to promotion. You also are going to need to make sure that you know who is on their bench in case they wind up like a shooting star and not a superstar. And these are very you need both. Your people in superstar mode foster growth, people in rockstar mode foster stability, and you need to balance growth and stability on every team. I mean, there are some moments in time when you need more people in superstar mode because it's unpredictable what's going to happen next. People are going to have to flex in all kinds of different ways. But there are also times when you need people who are in rockstar mode. I mean, I hope that every pilot on every plane I ever fly is in rockstar mode. I don't need them learning how to be, stunt pilots. I need them to land the plane.
I think a really important one is the idea of growth management and the growth management framework, and why this is so relevant to CMOs.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, so the growth manage, I think very often, at least at a lot of the companies where I worked, as we were doing sort of talent planning, we would use this thing called a 9 box, which asks you to judge people on performance and potential. And I'm going to assert that there is no such thing as a low potential person. And so I don't like that framework very much. Instead, I prefer growth management. And so growth management helps you understand what kind of growth trajectory a person is on, and also how well they're doing in their current role. And so when someone is on a steep growth trajectory, they're in superstar mode. When they're on a more gradual growth trajectory, they're in rockstar mode. But then there's also people in the middle who are performing well, but maybe they're not knocking your socks off. So what do you do to manage those people in the middle? It is it is tempting sometimes to label those people as B players, but I'm also going to assert there's no such thing as a B player. Like everybody can excel. Everyone can do exceptional work at something. Not everyone can't be exceptional at everything, but everyone. And so it is your job to push people when they've been sort of quarter after quarter, they've met expectations but never exceeded them. Give them projects where they can exceed, where they can demonstrate exceptional performance. And if they can't, like maybe encourage them to go find someplace where they can. And then in terms of the growth management framework, there are also people who are not performing at the other end of the, and for those people, you need to sort of figure out if this is someone who you've already explained the expectations to, and you've given them a lot of feedback, and they're still not performing. It's probably time to manage that person out. But there also may be people who are not performing, and it's your fault, not their fault. Those are the look yourself in the mirror folks. And maybe it's because it's a bad fit and you need to encourage them to go work somewhere else at the company. Maybe you haven't explained the role well enough. Maybe they haven't gotten the training they need. But I think especially in these times, we really cannot afford to keep people on our teams who are not doing great work. And it is not an act of kindness for that person or for the rest of the team to let people linger when they're failing to perform.
Yeah, and I want to just make a point about that is the impact. You may be putting off that decision because you just don't want to have that conversation, but the ripple effect on your team is a
Yes.
lot more than you think, because they
Yes.
know who's underperforming. They know who the rock stars and the superstars are, and they count themselves on it. And they see this person who's getting away with what they call murder. It's a drag for the whole team. And I think that's a part that really, as going through this book, it really reminded me, I mean, the crass way of thinking of this is, hire slowly, fire quickly, but there's truth in there in that. Yeah, you got to deal with the issues that are there. You need a team right now that can really deliver.
Yeah, and if we go back to that Bob story, I mean, I
Right.
was not doing Bob any favors. I was not doing the team any favors. I was not doing myself any favors, and I was not doing our investors any favors not to deal with Bob's poor performance.
And I think the quote that sort of sums that up, I think, is care personally, but kill the angel in the office.
Yeah, so the angel in the office. This is I talk a lot more about this in my next book, which is called Radical Respect. But very often it is hard to be radically candid across difference. And it is hard to, if you like, for me as a woman in the workplace, it was very hard. For sometimes I would be what I thought was radically candid, and I would get unjustly accused of obnoxious aggression. And it wasn't actually that this is like the abrasive problem. I don't know if you've read this, but there's a great article by Karen Snyder, who's the founder of Textio, about how in performance management, very often a man and a woman will have done the same thing, and they'll what'll be said of the man is, well, he's aggressive, but he has to be to get the job done. And what'll be said of the woman is, she's abrasive, and we're going to give her a poor rating. And the problem with getting that kind of bias, really, that is masquerading as feedback, especially for me earlier in my career, is that it was tempting for me to go the wrong way on challenge directly and to try to be liked. And that was a disaster. And then the other thing I found, that as a woman, I was dragged too high up on the care personally dimension. People expected me to do the equivalent of bake cupcakes for the whole office, which I just wasn't going to do that. And there's a wonderful essay by Virginia Woolf about how the job of the woman writer is to kill the angel in the house. And what she meant by that was, she was referring to this Victorian poem about how women are so wonderful because they have no wants and needs of their own. They just exist to serve the needs of the men around them. And she said, no, that's not that we're not going to give any credence to that idea. And I think Virginia Woolf, although she had a huge impact, did not manage to kill the angel in the house. Instead, the angel left the house and went into the office sometimes. Or so I think sort of dealing with those
Right.
expectations is really important.
So, one last question of one from the audience about exit interviews and how, that can help. I mean, you're going to make a decision and there's going to be an exit. So now what? Is that an opportunity?
Yes, absolutely. I think that if someone has left your team, and maybe they've left, maybe it's regretted attrition, and maybe they left because you fired them. Either way, I think it's a really good idea to have an exit interview, because in this moment, someone's leaving your team and they're more likely to be honest. So it's a great opportunity to solicit feedback. And you may learn something that you didn't know before in that exit interview. So never miss the opportunity to solicit feedback in an exit interview.
Okay. All right. So we're going to wrap up this, and I'd love to get your final words of wisdom. So if you could give us 2 do's and 1 don't when it comes to CMOs applying radical candor.
So do solicit feedback from everyone who you're, whether up, down, sideways. Do solicit feedback. Don't make the mistake of thinking that being authentic means to ignore the impact that your words have on others, right? So don't be obnoxiously aggressive. And more importantly, don't be ruinously empathetic. Don't pull your punches in a way that causes you to fail to communicate. Don't make the mistake that I made with Bob.
Yeah. All right. So we have 1 do and 2 don'ts. And I'm just going to throw in another thought that you had in the book, which is giving a trophy to an employee that says, you were right and I was wrong.
Yes, that is a great way. That's a do. Do make your listening tangible. So I used to have this big some I was on the sales side, and one of our customers had given us a big glass trophy. And I didn't know what to do with this thing. So I decided it was the I was wrong, you were right statue. And I would put it on people's desk as a way to try to make my listening tangible, but also to make it fun to disagree with me.
Love it. All right. Well, Kim Scott, thank you so much for joining us. Where can people find you, and when should they hire you?
You can hire me today. So if you go to radicalcandor.com, you can see the talks and workshops that we do. We also made a sitcom about radical candor. You can also find our podcast there. Listen to the Radical Candor podcast, or wherever you listen to podcasts. If you search for Radical Candor, you're bound to find it. And you can also check out my new book, which is called Radical Respect. You can pre-order that on Amazon.
All right. I'll get in line when we hang up. But Kim, thank you so much for being here. It's an amazing conversation. Really appreciate you and all the work that you're doing. So thank you.
Thank you. And I would be the world's biggest hypocrite if I didn't end by asking, what could I have done to make it easier for you all to be radically candid? Send me a note, radicalcandor@radicalcandor.com.
There it is. All right.